Weather, climate, vegetation. Weather. The difference between weather and climate. The term weather should not be confused with climate. The term weather should not be confused with with the climate, though they are very closely related to each other in the study of meteorology and climatology. Though they are very closely related to each other in the study of meteorology and climatology. We don't hear people saying that the climate of day is warm and cold, but we do talk of warm weather, a cold morning, a sunny afternoon, a rainy day, or a chilly night. Any casual remarks about the atmospheric conditions of a certain place at a certain time are about weather. It is never static and thus cannot be generalized. In the same country, even over a small area, the weather can vary tremendously. Uh, it may be sunny in one part of the district but raining heavily a few miles away. Strong gales may be experienced along the coast while the interior may be relatively calm. It is important to realize that any place can be subjected to haphazard changes in weather at any time. When we speak of climate, we mean the average atmospheric conditions of an area over a considerable time. For climatic averages, a minimum period of 35 years is desirable. For climatic averages, a minimum period of 35 years is desirable. This involves the systematic observation, recording, and processing of the various elements of climate such as rainfall, temperature, humidity, air pressure, winds, clouds, and sunshine before any standardization of the climate means or average can be arrived at. The climate of Malaysia is described as hot, wet, equatorial climate, which is a summing up of the average everyday climate of the country throughout the year. The degree of variability in the climate or weather of a country also differs. Generally speaking, the climate of temperature latitudes is far more variable than that of the tropics. The climate of the British Isles is also so changeable that many people have commented that Britain has no climate, only weather. Conversely, the climate of Egypt is so static that it makes a good deal of sense when people say that Egypt has no weather, only climate. Importance of climate and weather. The profound influence of climate and weather over man's activities can be seen from his everyday life. Forces of nature have regulated to a very great extent the sort of food we eat, what we eat, how we live and work, our mental alertness, our physical characteristics, and even our racial differences, when closely examined, have at least some relationship with the climate. The direction of winds once controlled the pattern of trading routes. The safety of modern air communications is closely tied to accurate meteorological reports from the ground stations. Despite the advance made in science and technology, farmers and their crops are still at the mercy of the climate and the weather. Conditions of temperature, precipitation, and humidity may promote or discourage the growth of fungus and diseases which may be injurious to both men and crops. Death rates are normally high in tropical countries and low deserts because germs are not transmitted readily in regions of high temperature and low humidity. Cool, fresh mountain air is always good for health. Cool, fresh mountain air is always good for health. Weather bureaus or meteorological stations are scattered all over the globe, including the oceans, using some of the most up-to-date weather instruments to gather a wide range of data as raw materials for the construction of weather maps or synoptic charts. Though men are still unable to tame the forces of nature such as floods, droughts, typhoons, or hurricanes, a sound knowledge of the trends or the weather systems can often help to avoid or reduce the seriousness of the calamities. Professional meteorologists are able to forecast the weather fairly accurately from local observations. A fall in the barometer, a change of cloud types, a bright sunset, or even a whisper of the wind can be very useful tips to a weather forecaster in detecting what is going to happen next. A casual glance at the sky will be sufficient for a weather expert to sum up the conditions of the atmosphere. Today, farmers are becoming more and more dependent upon meteorological services. A knowledge of the likely weather of a place will be useful for a farmer to plan his work for the season or the year. Frequent agricultural bulletins issued by the meteorological office will assist farmers to take due precautions against frosts, FROSTS, hail, heavy snowfall, or a period of possible drought. Sailors at sea are warned promptly of any oncoming gale or typhoon. Modern air transport, military operations, geographical expeditions, even important games and outings often take due consideration of meteorological reports. A fair knowledge of the weather is not only useful but often essential. The elements of weather and climate: to collect various climatic data and to prepare maps and charts of them. The following elements of climate are normally observed and measured by weather instruments. Number 1, rainfall. Rainfall, including other forms of precipitation, snow, sleet and hail, is always measured by a metal instrument called a rain gauge. It consists of a copper cylinder with a metal funnel either 5 inches or 8 inches in diameter, which leads into a smaller copper container or a glass bottle. The hole in the funnel that leads down the container is very small, so that evaporation of the collected rain is minimized. The gauge should be at least 1 foot above the ground and firmly fastened to avoid splashing. The instrument should be sited well away from tall buildings, high trees and other objects which would shelter it. The measurement of the rainfall is done by removing the funnel, emptying the rain in the container into a graduated cylinder with a 1.5 inch diameter. The reading should be done at eye level and to an accuracy of 0.01 inch. For greater accuracy, a special kind of taper measure as shown in figure, which tapers at the bottom may be used. It gives an accuracy up to 0.005 inch. An inch of rainfall means the amount of water that would cover the ground depth of 1 inch, provided one evaporated, drained off or percolated away. For meteorological recordings, a rainy day is reckoned as a period of 24 hours with at least 0.01 inch or more rain being recorded. If the amount exceeds 0.04 inch, it is considered a wet day. For general reckoning, the average rainfall for Malaysia is less than 0.3 inch a day. Only a torrential downpour can account of more than the inch of rainfall in a day. The rain gauge must be examined every day. In temperature regions, snowfall is carefully melted by warming the funnel and then measured. For all practical purposes, 10 to 12 inches of snow may be considered as equivalent to 1 inch of rain. The mean annual rainfall is obtained from the average ages of the total for each month is again added at the end of the year to find the annual rainfall. The mean annual rainfall is obtained from the average ages of annual rainfall is taken over a long period of say 35 years. For plotting in rainfall maps, places having the same mean annual rainfall are joined by a line called an isohyet. Isohyet is shown in many atlases. Rainfall can also be graphically depicted as shaded rainfall columns, one for each month of the year or in dispersal diagrams, one dot for each year for as many years as possible. The former illustrates the monthly rainfall resume over a year, and the latter shows at a glance the range of dry and wet years for 35 years. Pressure: air is made up of a number of mixed gases and has weight. It therefore exerts a pressure on Earth's surface which varies from place to place from time to time. This force that presses on the surface of any object can be fairly accurately measured. The instrument for measuring pressure is a barometer. Invented by the scientist Galileo and his assistant Torricelli in 1643. The ordinary mercury barometer consists of a long glass tube Temperature is very important element of climate and weather. The instrument for measuring temperature is the thermometer, which is a narrow glass tube filled with mercury or alcohol. It works on the principle that mercury expands when heated and contracts when cooled. On thermometers, temperatures are marked in two ways. If degrees Fahrenheit, and the freezing point is 32 degrees Fahrenheit, and the boiling point is 212 degrees Fahrenheit. For the most scientific purposes, the centigrade scale is preferred. Its freezing point is 0 degrees centigrade, and its boiling point is 100 degrees centigrade. The mean daily temperature of Malaysia is 80 degrees Fahrenheit, or 26.7 degree centigrade. For rapid conservation of one scale into another, the following formula may be used. To obtain Fahrenheit is equals to 1.8 into degrees centigrade C plus 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Example, to convert 20 degrees centigrade into Fahrenheit, 1.8 into 20 degrees centigrade plus 32 degrees Fahrenheit is equals to 36 plus 32 degrees. 32 plus 32 degrees is equals to 68 degree Fahrenheit. To obtain centigrade, degree Fahrenheit minus 32 divided by 1.8. Example, to convert 59 degrees Fahrenheit into centigrade, to convert 59 to centigrade, 59 degrees minus 32 degrees divided by 1.8 is equals to 27 divided by 1.8 is equals to 15 degrees centigrade. As the degree of hotness varies tremendously from one place to another, the setting of the instrument is very important. A temperature taken in open daylight is very high because it measures the direct insolation of the sun. It is better described as temperature in the sun. For agricultural purposes, earth temperatures are taken at various depths in the ground. The thermometer is enclosed in a special glass tube, and the bulb is embedded in paraffin wax so that they are less sensitive to abrupt temperature changes. To access the possible damages done by ground frost to crops temperature latitudes, grass temperatures also are taken. Humidity is measure of the dampness of atmosphere, which varies greatly from place to place at different times of day. The actual amount of water vapor present in the air, which is expressed in grams per cubic meter, is called the absolute humidity. But more important from the point of view of weather studies is the relative humidity. This is the ratio between the actual amount of water vapor and the total amount the air can hold at a given temperature, expressed as a percentage. Warm air can hold more water vapor than cold air. So, if it contains only half of the amount it could carry. The relative humidity is 50%. In the equatorial regions, over 80% is common in the morning, which means the air contains 4/5 as much water vapor as it can carry. When the relative humidity reaches 100%, the air is completely saturated. The air temperature is said to be at a dew point. Further cooling will condense the water vapor into clouds or rain. It is thus clear that when relative humidity is high, the air is moist, as in the equatorial regions. When it is low, the air is dry, as in the deserts. Wind. For wind is an air motion and has both direction and speed. Unlike other elements in climate such as rain, snow or sleet, winds are made up of a series of gusts and eddies that can only be only felt but not seen. When leaves fall, trees sway and dust particles move, when we realize that the wind is blowing. But there is nothing tangible that we can show or measure unless we can use of some conversion instruments. The instrument widely used for measuring wind direction is wind vane or weathercock. As a wind direction is always blocked by trees and tall buildings, weathercocks and different vanes need to be erected in an exposed position. The speed of wind is actually measured by anemometer. Sunshine. As mentioned in chapter 1, the amount of sunshine a place receives depends on the seasons, a factor determined by latitude and by the position of the earth and in its revolution around the sun. Tourist resorts, particularly in the higher temperature latitudes, are most concerned about the numbers of hours of sunshine they receive. In the tropics, where sunshine is abundant, people are less interested in the amount. In the tropics, where sunshine is abundant, people are less interested in the amount. In meteorological station, sunshine duration is recorded by sundial. In meteorological station, sunshine duration is recorded by sundial. 4 inches in diameter. Clouds. When air rises, it is cooled by expansion. After dew point has been reached, cooling leads to condensation of water vapor. Details of cloud type are intended to in code figures which have been internationally accepted. On maps, places with an equal degree of cloudiness are joined by lines known as isoneffs. As clouds vary so quickly from time to time at any particular place, isoneff maps have little significance. The classification of clouds is based on a combination of form, height and appearance. Four major clouds types and their variations can be recognized. High clouds, mainly cirrus (Ci) of feathery form at 20 to 40,000 feet above ground. Medium clouds, low clouds. ఇవన్నీ అయిపోయినాయి కదా, ఇంకోసారి చదువుదామా వద్దా? Retreating monsoon. The amount of frequency of rain decreases towards the end of the rainy season. It retreats gradually southwards after mid-September until it leaves the continent altogether. The Punjab plains, which receive the southwest monsoon earliest, are the first to see the withdrawal of the monsoon. The skies are clear again and the cool. Dry season returns in October with the outblowing northeast monsoon. The role of monsoons in India is vital in its economy. A late monsoon or one that ends far too early will condemn large stretches of agricultural land to drought. There will be widespread famine from crop failure and thousands will perish. When there is too much water from the rainy monsoons, severe floods occur, destroying both crops and leaves and disrupting communications. In no part of the world has the climate affected affected man's way of life so profoundly as in the monsoon lands. The Arctic or polar climate. The polar type of climate and vegetation is found mainly north of the Arctic Circle in the northern hemisphere. The ice caps are confined to Greenland and to the highlands of these high latitude regions, where the ground is permanently snow covered. The lowlands, with a few months ice free, have tundra vegetation. They include the coastal strip of Greenland, the barren grounds of northern Canada and Alaska, and the Arctic seaboard of Eurasia. In the southern hemisphere, the virtually uninhabited continent of Antarctica is the greatest single stretch of ice cap, where the layers of permanent ice are as thick and as 10,000 feet. Climate. Temperature. The polar climate is characterized by a very snow mean annual temperature, and its warmest month in June seldom rises to more than 50 degree Fahrenheit. In midwinter, January, temperature are as low as minus 35 degree Fahrenheit. and much colder in the interior. Normally not more than 4 months have temperatures above freezing point. Winters are long and very severe. Summers are cool and brief. Within the Arctic and Antarctic Circle, there are few weeks of continuous darkness. At the North Pole, there are 6 months without light in winter. Despite the long duration of sunshine in summer, when the sun does not set, temperatures remain low because the sun is low in the sky, and much of the warmth of its faint rays is either reflected by the ground snow or used up in melting the ice. It has little power. It has little power left to raise the air temperature. Water in the soil is frozen to great depths, and the summer heat can only thaw the upper 6 inches of the soil. The ground remains solidly frozen for all about 4 months, inaccessible to plants. Frost occurs at any time, and blizzards reaching a velocity of 130 miles an hour are not infrequent. They can be very hazardous for the polar inhabitants. In coastal districts where warmer water meets cold land, thick fogs may develop. They last for days, and in many instances it is not possible to see for more than few feet. Precipitation is mainly in the form of snow falling in winter and being drifted about during blizzards. Snowfall varies with locality. It may fall either as ice crystals or large amalgamated snowflakes, as it takes 10 to 12 inches of snow to make 1 inch of rain. 10 to 12 inches of snow to make 1 inch of rain. Precipitation in polar regions can be expected to be light, not more than 12 inches in a year. Convectional rainfall is great, generally absent because of the low rate of evaporation and the lack of moisture in the cold polar air. There is normally a summer maximum, and the precipitation is then in the form of rain or sleet. Tundra vegetation. In such adverse environment as the tundra, few plants survive. The greatest inhibiting factor the region's deficiency in heat, with a growing season of less than 3 months and the warmest month not exceeded 50°F. The tree survival line. There are no trees in the tundra. Such as environment can support only the lowest form of vegetation, mosses, lichens and sedges. Drainage in the tundra is usually poor, as the subsoil is permanently frozen. Ponds and marshes or waterlogged areas are found in hollows. In more sheltered spots, stunted birches, dwarf willows and undersized alders struggle for a meager existence. Climate conditions along the coastal lowlands are a little more favorable. Here are found some hardy grasses and the reindeer moss, which provide the only pasturage for the herbivores animals like reindeer. In brief summer, when the snow melt and the days are warmer and longer, berry bearing bushes and the Arctic flowers bloom. Though short-lived, they brighten the mountainous tundra landscape into Arctic prairies. In the summer, the tundra is full of activities. Birds migrate north to prey on the numerous insects which emerge when the snow thaw. Mammals like the wolves, foxes, musk fox, Arctic hare and lemmings also live in tundra region. The importance and recent development of the Arctic region. The Arctic region, once regarded as completely useless, as now of some economic importance. Apart from the efforts of the various governments in assisting the advancement of the Arctic inhabitants, the Eskimos, Lapps, Samoyeds, etc., new settlements have sprung up because of the discovery of minerals. Gold is mined in Alaska, nickel near Petsamo, USSR, petroleum in the Kenai Peninsula, Alaska, and copper at the Peninsula, Alaska, and copper at the Rankin Inlet, Canada. Coal has been mined in Spitsbergen for a long time and also in Alaska. With the declining reserves of iron ore around Lake Superior, the Great Lakes industrial concerns are using more and more iron from large iron ore deposits in Labrador. New rainy lines have been constructed to bring the ores to the St. Lawrence River for subsequent shipment to the major industrial districts. Rich deposits of iron ores at Kiruna and Gällivare in Sweden have made it possible for Sweden and Sweden to enjoy a prosperous export trade in iron and steel and other metallurgical products. With the establishment of ports on the Arctic seaboard of Eurasia, it is now possible to ship timber and fur from Siberia. Though the ports such as Igark at the mouth of the Yenisei are not ice free, modern icebreakers keep the passage open most of the time. On the Arctic lowlands, where the growing season is lengthened by warm currents or higher temperatures, experiments have been carried out to devise varieties of hardy cereals for local needs. It may not be long before the tundra is brought under great agricultural, especially past oral use. The healthy air and its preservative qualities, it is practically germ free, are factors worth consideration for future colonization. Scientists, meteorologists, and explorers have lived in the Arctic and Antarctica, making studies of their geology, weather conditions, plant and animal life that will be of great significance in years to come. Laurentian type of climate has cold, dry winters and warm, wet summers. Winter temperatures may be well below freezing point and snow falls to quite a depth. Summers are as warm as the tropics, 70 degrees to 80 degrees Fahrenheit, and if it were not for the cooling effects of the offshore cold currents from the Arctic, the summer might be even hotter. Though rain falls throughout the year, there is a distinct summer maximum from the easterly winds from the oceans. Okay. Salinity of the ocean. Almost every known chemical element can be found in varying proportions in the oceans, whose most characteristic feature is their salinity. In contrast to the fresh water of lakes and streams, all sea water contains large amounts of dissolved mineral matter, of which sodium chloride or common salt alone constitutes more than 77%. The other more important compounds include magnesium, calcium and potassium, while the rest are distinguishable only in traces of very minute quantities. Due to the free movement of ocean water, the proportions of different salts remain remarkably constant in all oceans and even to great depths, but the degree of concentration of the salt solution in oceans does very appreciably in different areas. This is expressed as salinity. The degree of saltness of water, either as a percentage or more often in parts per thousand, variations shown in salinity distribution maps by isohalines, lines joining places having an equal degree of salinity. Isohalines. Generally speaking, the average salinity of the oceans is 35.2 degrees, about 35 parts of salt in 1000 parts of water. In the Baltic Sea, where there is much dilution by fresh water and melting ice, the salinity is much lower, only about 7%. In the Red Sea, where there is much surface evaporation and fewer rivers to bring in fresh water, the average salinity increases to 39%. In enclosed seas, where are areas of inland drainage such as the Caspian Sea, the salinity is very high, 180 degrees. 180%. Okay. And in the Dead Sea of Palestine, a salinity of 250% has been recorded. The highest salinity is perhaps that of Lake Van in Asian Minor with 33%. It is a salt lake and salts are collected from its shores. The density of water is so high that in Lake Van or the Dead Sea, it is almost impossible to sink. Beginner swimmers will find it much easier to float here than anywhere else. The variation of salinity in the various seas and oceans is affected by the following factors. Okay. Rate of evaporation, the amount of fresh water by precipitation, streams and icebergs, the degree of water mixing by currents. Coral reefs. In tropical seas, many kinds of coral animals and marine organisms such as coral polyps, calcareous algae, shell forming creatures and lime secreting plants live in large colonies. Though they are very tiny creatures, their ability to secrete calcium carbonate within their tiny cells has given to rise a peculiar type of marine landform. They exist in numerous species of many forms, colors and shapes. Under favorable conditions, they grow in great profusion just below the water level. Taking coral animals as a whole, the polyps are the most abundant and also the most important. Each polyp resides in a tiny cup of coral and helps in form coral reefs. When they die, their limy skeletons are cemented into coralline limestone. They are also non-reef building species such as the precious corals of the Pacific Ocean and the red coral of the Mediterranean, which may survive in the colder and even the deeper waters. As a rule, they thrive well only in the warmer tropical seas. The reef building coral survives best under the following conditions. The water temperature must not fall below 20 degrees centigrade or 68 degrees Fahrenheit. This virtually limits the aerial distribution of corals to the tropical and subtropical zones. Again, they will not flourish when there are cold currents because of the upwelling of the cold water from the depths that cools the warm surface water. This explains why coral reefs are generally absent on the western coasts of continents. On other hand, the warming effect of the warm currents, example the Gulf Stream, means that corals are found far to the north and west Indies in the Atlantic Ocean. The Pacific and the Indian Oceans, however, have the most numerous coral reefs. The depth of water should not exceed by 30 fathoms or 180 feet, because beyond this depth, sunlight is too faint for photosynthesis to take place. This is essential for the survival of the microscopic algae, or which the coral polyps depend. On which the coral polyps depend. This is essential for survival of the microscopic algae on which the coral polyps depend. Shallow water of less than 100 feet is ideal, but there should always be plenty of water, as polyps cannot survive for too long out of water. Types of coral reefs: fringing reefs, barrier reefs, atolls. River regeneration. The earth's crust is far from stable, and it is not surprising that in the course of a river's development, parts may be uplifted or depressed, giving rise to certain characteristic features associated with regeneration, that is, being young again. A negative movement occurs when there is an uplift of land or fall in sea level. This will steepen the slope so that active downcutting is renewed. A fall in sea level leaves the flood plain at an increased altitude above the sea level. The river with its renewed vigor cuts into the former floodplain, leaving behind terraces on both sides of the river. There is also a break in the graded profile of the river, often marked by a series of rapids. This point where the old and regenerated profile meets is called the nick point or regenerated head. Earthquakes. The earth is never free from earthquakes for long, and more than 50,000 of them are recorded annually. Minor earth tremors caused by gentle waves of vibration within the earth's crust occur every few minutes. Major earthquakes, usually caused by movement along faults, can be very disastrous, particularly in densely populated areas. Earthquakes themselves may cause only restricted damage in the regions of occurrence, but their after effects can be very catastrophic. They produce gigantic tidal waves called tsunamis by the Japanese, which flooded the town and drowned thousands of people. Fire break out control beyond control as gas mains are shattered and building collapse. In several earthquakes, fissures gape open under the ground widths and undulates in the passage of the surface waves. A wave height of a quarter of an inch in the upheaval is sufficient to bring down most ordinary buildings. Roads, railways, and bridges are buckled and twisted. Telecommunications are cut when the cables are snapped. Hills are so shaken that landslides are widespread. As the vibration thin out of the edges like the series of waves set up by a stone thrown into the river, water damage is greatly reduced. Only the highly sensitive seismograph can record the movement of earthquakes. Seismograph can record the movement of earthquakes. The distribution of earthquakes. The world's distribution of earthquakes coincides very closely with that of volcanoes. Regions of greatest seismicity are circum-Pacific areas, with the epic centers are most frequent occurrences along the Pacific Ring of Fire. Pacific Ring of Fire. It is said that as 70% of earthquakes occur in the circum-Pacific belt. Another 20% of earthquakes take place in the Mediterranean Himalayan belt, including Asia Minor, the Himalayas, and parts of northwest China. Elsewhere, the Earth's crust is relatively stable and is less prone to earthquakes, though nowhere can be said to be immune to earth tremors. The international dateline. A traveler going eastwards time from Greenwich until he reaches the meridian 180 east. When he will be 12 hours ahead of GMT Greenwich time. Similarly, in going westwards, he loses 12 hours when he reaches 180 west. There is thus a total difference of 24 hours or a whole day between the two sides of the 180 meridian. This is the international dateline, where the date changes by exactly 1 day when it is crossed. A traveler crossing the dateline from east to west loses a day because of the loss in time he has made, and while crossing the dateline from west to east, he gains a day because of the gain in time he encountered. Thus, when it is midnight Friday on the Asiatic side, by crossing the line eastwards, he gains a day. It will be midnight Thursday on the American side. That is, he experiences the same calendar date twice. When Magellan ships eventually arrived home in Spain in 1522, after circumnavigating the world from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific and westwards across the international dateline, and the crew knew nothing about it, added a day for the one they had missed. Though they thought they had arrived on 5th September, they were shocked to be told the date was the 6th September. A modern aircraft leaving Wellington at 5 p.m. on Friday reaches Hawaii 4,100 miles away at 2 p.m. The same Friday, the same aircraft on its return journey from Hawaii leaves at 6 p.m. on Friday, but it arrives at Wellington at 11 a.m. on Sunday. Can you explain this? Okay. The international dateline in the mid-Pacific curves from the normal 180 meridian at the Bering Strait, Fiji, Tonga, and other islands to prevent confusion of day to day in some of the island groups that they cut through them by the meridian. Some of them keep Asiatic or New Zealand standard time, others follow the American date time. The international dateline is shown in figure. Okay. International dateline. Dawn and twilight. The brief period between a sunrise and full day light is called dawn. The brief period between sunrise and full day light is called the dawn. And that between sunset and complete darkness is termed twilight. And that between sunset and complete darkness is termed twilight. This is caused by the fact that during the periods of dawn and twilight the earth receives diffused or refracted light from the sun when it is whilst it is still below the horizon. Since the sun rises and sets in a vertical path at the equator, the period during which refracted light is received in short, but at temperate latitudes the sun rises and sets in an oblique path and the period of refracted light is longer. It is much longer still at the poles, so that the winter darkness is really only twilight of most of the time.